Thank you.
There we go.
Got it. So welcome everyone to what we hope will be a very informative and valuable hour and a half for you. Thank you for making the time and finding this, which we think is a very important and valuable conversation with Taryn. Thank you, Taryn. A quick introduction to Taryn. I met Taryn while we worked together at RMB in the early 2000s. So yes, quite a long time ago. And amongst a number of roles Taryn held at RMB, she was the head of central finance and also the head of operations for RMB. And at the time, Taryn was really recognized as an outstanding leader, not only due to her strong technical skills, but actually specifically so for her amazing people ability and her people following that she developed, during her leadership roles. Taryn then decided she wanted to leave the world of investment banking to focus on her true passion, that of empowering people to awaken their own possibilities and living their best lives. And I think that's probably a very short version of how Taryn would explain it, but that's my interpretation anyway, Taryn. So she's worked extensively with teams at RMB, since leaving the bank, and she's also worked with us at RMI Investment Managers. And what I love most about Taryn is that she truly understands our world of finance, and she also deeply connects with the challenges that we have. So she really has this unique combination of, a background in investment banking, but then, truly following her passion around people development. We spent a bit of time with Taryn. She did this amazing piece of research, and some of our team members actually contributed to it as well. And why we thought we wanted to share it with you is that we feel that we're all acutely aware of what the leadership challenges are that we face, now in a post-COVID world. But we're not really always sure what exactly to do about them, how to navigate them, and how to, truly step into our leadership roles, given, I suppose, all the difficulty that we know a lot of people have been going through, including ourselves. And this is really the essence of what Taryn will share with us today. She'll touch on her actual research and the findings, but more importantly, she's going to share with us some really practical advice and tips on how to navigate these, not just in our workspaces, but of course also within our families and within our communities, where we also, see a lot of the challenges. So you can use the conversation box on the side to post questions to Taryn during the session, and she can pick them up as she goes. But we will also, hopefully if time allows, do a short Q&A at the end where you can also ask Taryn questions. We are recording it, so we will be sharing it with everyone afterwards if you want to listen to it again or share it within our affiliate family. And then lastly, Taryn is available. This is her passion. This is what she's so brilliant at. I've personally benefited from her amazing, training and coaching skills, and she would be very happy to connect with any of you afterwards, if you have the desire to do so. So with that, Taryn, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you for your time and for being willing to do this. We truly appreciate it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that amazing. It's always interesting to hear other people's words about yourself. So thank you for that introduction and for the very warm welcome. RMI is a company that's very close to my heart. So it's a joy to participate in this and to be with you all today. So a couple of logistical things. I'm going to share the screen shortly and share a presentation that we'll be working through and taking you through that. But as a leader said, please feel free to use the chat box. Eric is my partner and colleague, and he is managing the chat box. So you'll probably see him putting some comments in the chat box as we go along and answering some of you. So there he is. You can say hello to Eric there to put a face to the name. So please feel free to do that. And as a starting point, what would be awesome is for you just to sort of say hi in the chat box. And as a starting question, just what's sort of one of the predominant challenges you're facing as a leader, given the working from home and COVID and the shift in the working world. And so you can kind of just give a perspective of some of the challenges that you are worried about, things that you are thinking about. So feel free to put that in the chat box as we go along. As a leader said, we will create space for some conversation, but it is quite a full hour and a half. What I do encourage you is to give yourselves permission to be present to what this offers you. One of the worst things we have going on in the world at the moment is the idea of multitasking being something that makes us more efficient. All it does is makes us more tired. So I encourage you, if you've chosen to participate in this, to give yourselves the gift of presence and to pay attention to what this may offer you. As I share the content of today, I'm going to be taking you through the research. The gift of it, or the opportunity in it, is to notice the truth for yourself. Where does this resonate for you? And also, how does this impact your team? So how are people in your space experiencing this? So let's get started. I'm going to share the presentation with everybody there. So you should hopefully be able to see that. I'm going to put the chat box up here so I can just also see if there's anything I need to know. But every now and again, I'm going to ask Eric to just give me a heads up of what's coming up on the chat box. So WTF, obviously that has many meanings. The WTF-H research findings is a project that I launched probably exactly a year ago now, to discover the impact COVID is having on people in the working world. We all know there is an impact, but getting clear about what it is where the WTF-H project came from. Elida has already welcomed me and given you a bit of my background. As you know, that I come from a merchant, a finance and risk and operations background. So I really do understand the world of finance and how that works in the world of banking. But as Elida said, my passion is people. I truly am curious about human beings and what makes us step into our fullest potential, and how do we create space for us to be the best versions of ourselves. The work that I do now in my company called LightWalker Consulting is really supporting teams and organizations and bringing the life force back into the workforce. And the reason I say that is because, you know, we all have bias, and I need to be clear about what my biases are when I go into doing this work. And the major bias is I don't believe work is supposed to be a struggle. I don't believe it's something that we're supposed to suffer through to make enough money to be able to send our children to schools and hopefully one day, you know, live a life where we have enough money at the end. I truly believe that businesses create opportunities for people to be the best versions of themselves, to contribute their talents and their gifts, and to be part of something bigger than themselves so that we can contribute to an economy in a country that needs that. So work needs to be fulfilling and not something we have to just survive and get through. And obviously that has got different meanings for different people. Why this project? You know, when COVID hit, there was a lot going on for people, and you know, it would be an understatement to say there was an impact. And as I was sitting and working with clients and working with people through various dynamics, what was going on for them, I got more and more curious about letting people tell their stories. So what is an individual's story can contribute to an awareness of how does this truly impact people? And so whilst I had a deep intuition of what was going on for people, the idea of getting and collating people's stories and letting them express it so we could see what the patterns were is where this project came from. And so what happened is we kind of launched it. I put it out into the world and said, we're going to do this WTF-H project. Who would be willing to contribute their stories to it? And that is how the project was launched. Through the research, the official research, I interviewed 66 volunteers that came forward to say they would be willing to give me an hour to share their stories. As Elida has said, some of the people within RMI are part of that team that contributed. The important part of this is I think there were closer to 70 people that actually did participate. The 66 are the ones that I tracked and got the recordings and did all the work from. Subsequent to the results being released, I've worked with probably about close on 200 people in various teams and got their input into this as well. And so it has actually got a much wider focus, but not part of the original research. The research approach was a conversation. It was a little bit of a chat, just asking people to share their experience. And the experience I asked was on 4 dimensions. What has been the impact for you, and what are you thinking you need in a work context on a physical plane? So from a physical perspective, this means your physical working environment, your health, you know, what has changed in your physical world, your home. Schooling has obviously been a big thing around that. You know, exercise, food, sex, sleeping, all the dynamics of our very physical experience. What has been the impact for you? What has changed, and what are you needing? I then asked, what has been the emotional impact for you? On the emotional side, we're looking at sort of a sense of your emotional state and what had been happening for you, but also what is going on in terms of relationships. What's been the impact on you and relationships? Personal, private relationships, your colleagues, your friends, your bosses, your clients. How has your relationship structure altered through the pandemic? I then asked people for the mental impact. What has been going on for you on a mental dimension? Now, we know that mental well-being is something that everybody's talking about. Mental health has become something that is a really big thing. But what do we actually mean by that? What is going on in terms of anxiety and overwhelm and depression? And also then from a mental perspective, what's the impact on creativity, on decision-making, on being able to be proactive at work? All those dimensions are impacted in the mental realm. And then lastly, one that may seem weird is what's going on from a spiritual perspective. And spirituality in business seems like a weird link, but when we're talking about spiritual, it's a sense of meaning, a sense of connection to something bigger than myself. Obviously, my sense of faith, my sense of passion and purpose. And to what extent do I feel like my work still matters and that I have a sense of connection with that? And so those 4 dimensions were the way we created a space for people to share their stories and give us the information that has translated into the results that you'll see today. To give you some insight into the types of people that showed up, some of the relevant stats is most of the people that I spoke to are in organizations greater than 500 people. So actually most of it was greater than 200 people. And you can see predominantly in financial services and consulting. That's really because that's probably part of the sector that I work in. And so really it's people within the spaces that you guys are largely exposed to. There was a balance between leaders and employees, so people that were facing responsibility from different levels. And what was really interesting for me is there was really no difference in the stories I was hearing in terms of the individual challenges people were facing. 76% of the people were working at this stage 4 to 5 days a week from home. And I asked people the question, do you want to go back to the office full time? And the answer was unequivocally no. There was an absolute, I can't even tell you, it wasn't even a no, it was a hell no. I had a whole lot of swearing that happened at this point. There was this huge resistance to going back to the office. Now, we're going to talk about that through the research in terms of what does this no mean? Why is it that people have said no to coming back to the office? And is it something that they actually are meaning? The question in itself is flawed because it's saying, do you want to come back to the office full time? And the answer is no. And as we go through the research, you'll see that people are saying they just want to be able to have their own perspective and their own choice around this. And we'll explore this a little bit more in one of the key findings. When we started the research, we asked these 2 questions. Have you had COVID and have you lost anyone to COVID? At that stage, most people had not had COVID. And you can see there was sort of half the people, to some extent, had lost somebody to COVID. The challenge with this is if you have a look at when we did the research, The research was between the second and the third wave. Subsequent to the research period, we know that those stats have altered dramatically. That I know personally people that did the research project with me that have lost their lives. I also know people that have had huge amounts of change in those stats. So when I give you some of the insights of the findings, which came from this period of time, it is hugely amplified when we understand the impact the third wave has had on people. When we're looking at the lull that we're in now again, we can notice that people are going back to a certain level of perceived freedom and excitement and possibility again. But many people are anticipating, is there a fourth wave coming? And what does that mean? This was also at the point where vaccines were not really a big part of the conversation and the debate. So there wasn't conversation specifically around the vaccines, but that has obviously come into the conversations subsequent to that. So at this point, we're going to do a quick poll. So I'm just going to pull up a poll here and I'm going to ask you, and these are all anonymous, so you don't need to worry that we can track any answers from anything, but have you had COVID? So if you'd be willing to share that, and we'll share the results. Have you personally had COVID? Right, so we've got 32 people, 33. All right. So if we end that poll, about a third of the people on this call have had COVID. Yeah. And having COVID in itself, for people that I've been talking to, has many impacts. So certainly we have the long COVID fatigue symptoms and other aspects. But on a mental and emotional level, a lot of people have been talking about, you know, the challenge of having COVID and what does that mean and why did I survive? And you know, obviously all the blessings that come with that, but also some of the challenges that come with that. So if you've had any of that experience, it'd be useful to know as well. You can share that in the chat box if you feel free to. Let's ask one more question. Have you lost anyone to COVID? And you'll see there's a number of different ways that you can answer that question, and you can choose multiple answers as well. So have you lost anyone to COVID? Okay, so 29 of the 40, there's a couple of people still answering. All right, so I think we can end it there. 32 of you have answered. So you can see 22% of you. I'm very sorry to all of you for the loss that you've experienced through this. I've lost people I love. We've lost people in our team. And yes, we know a lot of people that we've lost, but not necessarily anybody close to me. And there's 2 people that have not experienced loss. So this just kind of gives us a perspective when we start talking about some of the findings around grief and what's happening for people is, you know, in a sample group of 40 of us, how many of us have lost people. And it's said that for every one person who dies, there are at least 5 people directly impacted by that. It's probably much more in a culture like South Africa, but it's useful to start knowing the impact loss is having on people. So I have shared those, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's just continue with the share. The presentations disappeared. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry, guys, the presentation seems to have disappeared from my screen. Let's go back here.
I'm going to share the results.
Perfect. All right, so we can start to see our own personal experience of what's going on in terms of having had COVID and losing people that we love to COVID and people that we know and people in our teams to COVID. One of the most interesting findings that stood out for me was asking people, does your company have a wellness program? And that obviously took on many different forms. About 2/3 of the people in the research said that their company did have a wellness program. Most of the wellness programs were communication programs that were communicating to people around COVID and, you know, protocols and taking care of themselves and so on and so forth. To some extent, that program extended into mindfulness practices, a lot of yoga practices and that sort of thing, and not necessarily always a lot around the mental well-being and emotional well-being, but definitely a lot of support from typically an ICAS or an outsourced company that was able to support from that perspective. When I asked, do you use your company wellness program? And this was the part that was interesting for me. 4 out of 5 said no. And this to me was amazing, because as they were sharing their stories, it was very clear there was a huge amount of impact for people and a lot going on for people. And when I interrogated this answer with people, what is it that stops you from using the wellness program? It was really interesting to see what the answers were around that. One of the predominant answers were, I don't want to be on a report where people think I'm not coping. So the idea of leaders looking at a wellness program report and using that as information about level of resilience, level of ability to cope with things. The other answer was, I don't need it, other people need it. Yeah, I'm fine. And we'll see that translates into some of the findings we have going on in the program as well, in the research project as well. And then lastly was, I'd rather do that outside of work. You know, that's something I don't want to do from a work perspective. I want to do that in my own time. And with that came the sort of, I don't have enough time for that sort of thing as well. I'm already working ridiculous hours. How do I fit in this as well? So that all of this starts to filter into some of the concepts. So as a starting point, you can post in the chat box, and I'm going to ask Eric if there's anything that's coming up in the chat box that you want to share with the group as a whole at this point.
Yeah. Let me just unmute myself.
Hi, yes, thank you. Oh, sorry. So some of the things that have come up have been disconnecting with the team. So a lot of people have, well, some people have said it's been difficult to connect with the team, especially with new staff, new hires that have come through. Some people have said they are back at the office proportionately. I don't know what that means, but I'm guessing some people are back at the office for some of the time, and that has helped. But how do we start engaging with people physically now? And especially, how do we help people feel safe when they do come back to the office? And then one person, and Taryn will touch on this a bit later, also talked about the blurring of the lines between working and living in one place. How do you manage those boundaries? So I think those are the main findings so far. Taryn?
I'm going to unmute them. Thank you. So definitely some of those things, and we're going to talk about the impact of going back to the office and how that is going to, or what that impact is. So please feel free to continue sharing in the chat box the various thoughts coming up for you. So what are the findings from all of these stories that people shared? What is it that are the themes? And this took me quite a long time of sitting and pondering and working through the various transcripts and really trying to distill the essence of what people were sharing into something that can be meaningful for leaders in going forward. And there are 5 themes that we have noticed that have emerged. And the first retains to burnout. Burnout has not, Paige says I couldn't see the results of the poll.
I'm working on it.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you. So when we look at burnout has been something that we have noticed in the background of certainly people in the corporate space for a very long time. With COVID hitting and working from home and the trauma that people were going through, we've seen burnout explode. What was interesting for me when I started to look at burnout is that everybody spoke about it in such a different way. And there is a combination of what is the organization's responsibility for burnout and what is the individual's part that they play in that being an experience in their life. So we'll talk a bit more about my fatigue is not your fatigue and the different styles of burnout that we're seeing and what that means for us as leaders. The next thing is the fall of the martyr. So we've seen a lot of people that have been, I'm fine, but other people are not. And to notice the martyrdom that is being presented in the business world, that really encourage us to start looking at how do we take off the mask and deal with the vulnerability of what's going on for ourselves and each other. The third one is how transaction has become more important than connection, not necessarily intentionally, but almost just naturally through the way that we are working. The next one, no space for time. So how busyness has become quite an addiction and how we really just do not create space for us to breathe, to think, to process, to deal with things in our lives. And lastly, the empathy gap. There's clearly a lot of compassion, a lot of support for people, but what does true empathy and action look like from a leadership perspective? And how do we integrate empathy into our decision making? How do we use that as part of our way of leading people through this? So these were the 5 key findings. We're going to go through each of these 5. At this point, you can just start to notice which one kind of stands out for you, which one's grabbing your attention, which one's asking you to pay attention to it. So let's talk about burnout. My fatigue is not your fatigue. Fatigue is an interesting word. And when I was doing some additional research around this, I looked at this article, which was really amazing, by Jennifer Moss, called Beyond Burnt Out. And she had this statement: leaders are tired and they're tired of leading tired people. And for me, it really encapsulated exactly what people were saying in so many different ways. We need to acknowledge that exhaustion is not a sign of efficacy. Exhaustion is not a sign of being, brilliant in the world. Busyness and the addiction to busyness is something that we have, I think, a greater pandemic around. So being able to start interrupting this and saying, this is not a sign of the fact that you're important. This is not a sign of the fact that you are doing well in your life. And when I started to explore this word tired, these are the various words that people use to describe their levels of fatigue. I'm drained, I'm scattered, I'm impatient, I'm numb, I'm depleted. You can have a look at these words now, and I'd love it if you feel willing to and brave enough to put in the chat box which of these words resonate with you. Which one of them, or which couple of them, start to describe some of how you feel in the workplace at the moment. Drained, exhausted, depleted, irritable, anxious, impatient, forgetful, scattered, overwhelmed, numb, confused, stuck. All of these words are synonyms for the burnout kind of tired that we're seeing. Thank you, Sonia. I see you've put scattered. Althea saying exhausted. Impatient, exactly, Zoma. Anxious, irritable, and impatient. Yeah. And we kind of judge ourselves for these feelings. We hold ourselves to very high standards of perfectionism. So on top of feeling this, we often judge ourselves for that and bring in that level of personal attack as well. When we have a look at it, those 4 columns relate to the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual dynamics that we see happening for people. On the physical, we see that people are drained. This is definitely shifting now that we're into level 1 and we're starting to see how this has been taken care of differently. I'm not going to go through all of this. You will have a copy of the presentation and you can go through it. One of the big things when we look at, is my workspace ergonomic and comfortable? is there's definitely a difference between people that have a dedicated home workspace where they've been able to set up screens and chairs and so on and so forth. Undeniably, people have far more of a connection with their physiotherapists than they ever have before. You know, they have them on speed dial for kind of working from home from their dining room tables and so on and so forth. People generally love their workspace at home though. I have heard so many people say to me, my office is prettier than it is going to the office. And I get fresh air and I can walk outside on the grass. And I, you know, other than the fridge has many meanings for many people when it comes to COVID. But generally people, the only thing they complain about when they talk about their home workspace is the temperature. So it gets too hot or too cold. The thing that stood out the most is this: I have a daily routine that works well for me. At the time of the research, people really battled to find routine, to have a rhythm to their day that worked for them, to find a start and an end point to the day that they felt was valuable for them was really difficult. And then the last one that really is worth highlighting is I get enough movement and exercise. Whilst many people were very comfortable they got exercise, they did not feel they were getting enough movement. So being able to walk around, you know, just walking between meetings, being able to do those sorts of things. People had multiple views about the drive to the office and what that meant. For most people, whilst they don't want to go back to the drive to the office, they did acknowledge the drive time between the office and home gave them space to breathe and space to think, which we talk about in one of the other findings. So people are physically drained. This is not a kind of exhaustion that just comes from sleeping. There's something else that is needed to replenish it. And it doesn't also come just by going on leave and going on holiday, because taking leave and going on holiday doesn't actually resolve some of the challenges that we're seeing. When we look at the emotional side of things, there is a huge amount of emotional depletion. And whilst people said they have good relationships, unequivocally, this was a very high response that the relationships I have are great. There was a great sense of loneliness. So feeling alone in the world. And if you have a look at the research, a large part of feeling lonely has got to do with multitasking, got to do with while somebody's speaking to me, even could be happening for you right now, I'm busy doing other things. So I'm feeling very split, and that loneliness is getting amplified for people. Boundaries is undeniably an enormous thing. I think Eric mentioned somebody had brought that up. I talk about my bosses in my bedroom and my children are in the boardroom, and that just messes up every ounce of me knowing what fits in where in my life. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about leaders' responsibilities and boundaries and how we manage that and how we set them. And then lastly, really the permission to take time for self-care. So people have filled up their commute time with work. People have filled up their walking time with work. People have filled up their chatting time with work. So there's no space for debrief. There's no space for expression. There's no space for any of these things. And that contributes very much to the no space for time finding that comes up a little bit later on. People are mentally overwhelmed, without a doubt. Mental fatigue has to be the biggest thing that I see in the people that I'm working with right now. And that means making decisions is very difficult. Leadership decisions are a little bit challenging. What do we even make decisions based on? There's a concept called normalcy bias, where we as human beings look to the past and what has been normal for us to use as information and data to make decisions to try and predict the future. We all know in the world that we're in at the moment, it's really challenging to know what of the past is accurate, what is relevant, what is normal. And then we start to have this strange word being thrown around called the new normal. And how do we make decisions? On an individual level, can I even make a decision about going on holiday? Yeah, I make a decision and then it gets overruled. What decisions are worth connecting to, committing to? So there's this huge challenge around decision making, and that's impacting empowerment, and that's impacting accountability, And it's impacting the ability for organizations and teams to move forward rather just moving round and round and round. I'm not sure if any of you have experienced that, where you feel like you're really busy going nowhere. You know, it's just doing a lot of work, but towards what goal? What are we trying to achieve? The other thing that has become really, really the two at the end here, I feel creative and stimulated to solve problems. We'll talk about creativity a little bit later on, but people just don't even want to. There's an idea of just keeping things under control, just reacting to what needs to be done. But how do we truly create solutions? And then lastly, people don't wake up excited at the moment. There's a wake up of, let's just get through the day. Let's just do what's next. Spiritually confused is the one that we can, the last factor that's contributing to people's burnout. A sense of faith and optimism, that certainly was one that we got very mixed reviews on, mixed senses on. But the thing that undeniably was very low is that I feel a sense of purpose and meaning in my life. And that's a very strong clue of the level of grief that people are going through. When we're going through the kind of change that this has brought about in our worlds, we lose a connection with what's important. And there's a real challenge in trying to redecide what is important to me and what do I want to do. And that contributed to this. Very few people said to me, they believe the work they do makes a difference. And I think that that's something that as leaders, we really, really need to pay attention to. How has COVID changed the workspace? And what does it mean in terms of what does it truly mean to leave a legacy, to make a difference, to contribute? And lastly, a disconnect from my sense of inner knowing, from my intuition. So what does this mean as leaders?
One finding.
Okay, you're not, no. You can.
Thank you. So it's Eric here again. One of the interesting things that came up in the chat box is somebody said, if people are so overwhelmed and fatigued working from home, why don't they want to go back to the office? So that's an interesting one. And Taryn is going to be talking a little bit about that in a moment.
Yeah, it's a really, really beautiful question. So I'm going to come back to that. So just remind me if I miss it, but it's really useful to come back to that. As leaders, what is our responsibility when it comes to burnout? What I started to look at here is there was a small group of people in the research that weren't demonstrating any signs of burnout. They're the same challenges, they even had grief, but they weren't demonstrating any of what we were talking about around burnout. And the only difference was they were talking about how integrated their life had become, as opposed to them trying to balance everything. And so the idea of work-life balance means that, you know, I must try and fit everything in. This is work time, this is home time, school time, children time. There's a sort of sense of trade-off that happens in trying to balance everything together. The people that are not demonstrating burnout are the ones that say, this is my day, this is my time, I do things as I want to and when I want to. They could align themselves with their own biorhythms. They could work where they wanted to. They could work how they wanted to. They could take a nap in the middle of the day without somebody checking, why aren't you on Teams? Your green light is not there. They were able to manage their own delivery and their own workflow. And the difference in their sort of sense of emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being was off the charts. And so this idea of managing time to be able to fit everything in, it really needs to shift to how do we create cultures where we make people empowered and accountable for how they look after themselves in a day. So the idea of work starts now and ends now really has become an illusion, as opposed to what does true delivery look like? And that obviously has impacts for us as leaders in terms of performance management and all the things that we're wanting to do. But there is this vast difference. And as leaders, how do you manage your own work-life integration? How do you shift into a space of permission to balance everything for yourself in a way that works for you, that is unique and not the same as everybody else? The other thing that's not on the screen, but a really important part of what's been coming up for people is sort of shifting from the idea that work and life are different. that these, and again, that's part of this integration, that I now have profound flexibility, that my life has become something that I'm in control of. That's challenging for leaders to let go of. That's challenging for leaders to truly release. In some of the theoretical research that's been done, there's a sense of looking at how cultures form as a community of people contributing rather than leaders dictating what the goals are and what we're going to be doing. So sort of a real bottom-up approach to creating the business, the goals, the vision for the future. And that is a change in leadership style in a very big way. So I wonder if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask at this point. You're welcome to put your camera on if you do have a question around burnout and leadership responsibility.
Does this point answer why people don't want to come back to the office?
So this point doesn't really answer why people don't want to come to the office holistically. It is part of it, but definitely there's more around why people don't want to come back to the office. We'll see when we look at transaction over connection, what that is about. All right.
Leadership shifts to outcomes focused.
Yes, exactly right. Leadership shift to outcomes focus. So rather than managing time, managing, I don't even want to say managing productivity, because productivity is not useful. Managing effective creation, the ability to create things that move us, that change things. That is the thing that is changing. Right, let's move on to the next one. We can come back to some Q&A later on. So the fall of the martyr. Certainly this was one that got me thinking very deeply about myself and my way of being in the world and the way that I work with other people. When we look at the archetype of the martyr is an over-responsible, I'm here to take care of everybody. And that, without a doubt, from a leadership perspective, is something that we've seen people doing, is it's my job to look after everybody else. And that has translated into this picture, where there's this kind of consistent view of I'm fine, but I'm really sacrificing myself for everybody else's well-being and good. Be that my children, be that my family, be that my colleagues, be that my employees, be that my friends. And so this is the way we often tend to lead in some way, shape, or form. And we have valued that in the past. We have rewarded this kind of behavior in a very, very big way. And what it means is we teach people that this is what leadership looks like. We teach people that this is what responsibility looks like. It means that you have to suffer in order to be valuable. And making value and suffering, part of the same continuum means that there's no way for us to generate more energy. There has to be a depletion for us to get somewhere. And this really requires a mindset shift of self-care at the center. We have all the cliches, put your mask on first, you cannot pour from an empty cup. All of those things are real. But as an individual, and it obviously contributes to the burnout we're seeing, as an individual, I value myself based on the level of sacrifice. And I've worked with so many individuals and teams around this now in terms of the very deep, deep challenges of changing that belief system, that this is not creating a healthy way of being in the world of work. And I think it's one of the gifts of COVID is giving us this opportunity to reassess, how do we create rather than deplete? How do we open up to possibility of doing things differently? How do we lead from a full place, not from a depleted place? And one of the challenges with this is an idea that has become very, very prevalent in the world of psychology at the moment, and that is toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is the absolute insistence of being fine. It's the way we try and dismiss or minimize some of what's going on for us on an emotional level with statements that, everything is good, everything happens for a reason, others have it much worse. We're all going through stuff, so it's not so bad. We do this to other people. If my child died, you wouldn't go, at least you have another child. But we do this to ourselves and each other. I'm really tired, but at least I have a job. I'm taking a lot of strain, but this is a nice problem to have. The idea of dismissing the struggle we're facing with some insistence on being positive. And when others bring in a sort of sense of trying to express how they feel, we often tell them, you must be positive, don't be negative. In the workspace, we often even say that that's a bad attitude. You must have a good attitude. And there's multiple levels to this that leads to a form of bypassing. We bypass the emotions, we bypass our truth, and we just keep going. And we live in what I call the when-then strategies. When we get through this deadline, then I'll have a holiday. When this is over, when this phase is over, then we'll feel better. When we go back to the office, then these things will happen. This is contributing in a very big way to people's sense of depletion and burnout. And actually, one of the challenges is there's no space to contribute my truth, to express myself authentically through the process. And as leaders, this was part of linked to that wellness program. One of the reasons we don't go to get support, ask for help, do what we need to, is because the insistence of being strong, the insistence of being positive. So this has been something that with many, many leadership teams and organizations, I've been working on. How does toxic positivity contribute to a work environment that's draining? Eric wants to ask something. So.
Yeah, thank you. So as you're talking, Taryn, I'm thinking about this, and I mean, you and I have had conversations about toxic positivity, but I'm sure the leaders have a question that says it's all very well to say that people have to express their emotions at work and say we're going through stuff, I'm struggling. But that does sound like a negative culture or a negative work environment. How do we accommodate the fact that people are feeling burned out and depleted? How can we honor that and then still have what we might call traditionally a positive, uplifting work environment? Go.
So the answer to that has got to do with the empathy gap and the level of compassion that's needed in terms of not having conversations that open up drama, but having conversations that open up space to be heard and to create opportunity to find solutions. So there's a very big difference if I ask somebody, how are they? And they go into a lot of drama and I contribute to that drama and we just spiral, or ask them how they're doing and say, tell me more. And then what's the next step? What can we do about it? And so these are skills, conversational skills, empathy skills, skills of compassion that actually help people feel like they become lighter and move forward rather than staying stuck in the same experience over and over. So here's some beautiful comics that we found that illustrate some of the toxic positivity that we see in the world. You need to speak goodness into existence. You're falling off a cliff, but just stay positive. I love this one. Focus on the positive in this situation. And the truth is, it doesn't feel like that right now. And this is my favorite. Have you considered taking up yoga when I really feel like my world is burning? And again, as Eric quite rightly points out, it's not about saying, okay, stay there. It's about the skill of being able to move people in a healthy way through this. And this is an empathy skill. It's a leadership skill that is needed in the world at the moment. The other aspect of the martyrdom is the world of boundaries. And boundaries has become a really amazing thing that we've been working with so many teams around. Boundaries relates and translates to the ability to say yes and to say no. To have an authentic way of saying yes or no. What I mean by that is, does my outside no match my inside no? Or does my outside yes match my inside yes? Often what we have is people feeling no and saying yes because they're people pleasers, have FOMO, feel that they're going to get into trouble, feel like they'll have a bad attitude, all the toxic positivity stuff that we've had. And I see so many organizations talking about no meeting Friday, managing your own diary. You're the boss of your diary. You can do what you need to take care of yourself. But when people say no, it's overridden. So if my boss asks me to attend a meeting, I had somebody tell me this yesterday. Somebody's boss asked them, will you attend a meeting? And they said, no, I'm fetching my kids. And they said, well, you can do it in the car. So we don't hear the no. And that's a lack of consent. And so people don't have the ability to manage themselves in the process. And this is things that people are really, really worried about coming back to the office, is that's going to become even more. In a world where we're trying to create flexibility and the ability for people to take accountability and be empowered, one of the most important things that we need to do is be okay to hear no. Creating a culture where no is okay is really, really important for a healthy workplace. And that is something that I see many leaders, many of us are very challenged by. So the leadership opportunity here is to bring awareness into how toxic positivity actually creates a stuckness. And how do we, as Eric quite rightly asked, how do we create different kinds of skills so people can move through what's happening for them? And how do we create cultures where we can say no, but we can also say yes, and we can honor boundaries, my own and others. I can't tell you the level of awful stories I've heard about overriding boundaries.
There's a question here.
Beautiful. So apparently there's a question.
So one of the questions that's come through is saying, how do you manage to empower people and not let people take advantage of the situation? And I guess it's about, if your boss says, can I have a meeting? And somebody says no, then perhaps they're just taking advantage. Taryn?
So I think the truth of it is that there are going to be people that do take advantage. And that is a different question. That, when we're leading, how brave are we at dealing with people that are taking advantage of us? How do we bring that into the conversation? And that is more of a performance conversation of, I feel like you're taking advantage of me because there isn't the correct balance of yes or no, or whatever is happening for people. So that is a bespoke conversation that is necessary with that person. But often what we do is our fear of being taken advantage of means we put policies in place for everyone. And the truth is not everyone's going to take advantage of you. And if your entire workforce is taking advantage of you, we have a different cultural dynamic we need to deal with. That there's something else that's going on in the environment, that people are to that level not loyal to the environment, then there's something else going on. In truth, most adults, 80% of human beings, are willing to do well for the organization. There is not a single person on this call, I hazard a guess, that is sitting here trying to upset the people they work for or trying to take advantage of it. And so the more we treat people like adults, the more they show up like adults. But when there's an exception to that, we do need to deal with that. Our fear is that there is one or two people that will take advantage of us, and then we don't deal with them very well. So we try and deal with everybody that way. So leaders saying that if you can't say no, I can't hear no. That's exactly right, a leader. Really beautifully.
There's another comment here as well.
So let me just finish this.
Yeah.
Is that one of the best ways to be able to learn to hear no is to be able to say no. And many of us as people pleasers don't do that. Exactly right, Asakam, is that people are inherently good. So there's a 1% that maybe is not, and let's manage them as exceptions. Let's lead the bulk of people and manage those that need to be managed rather than the other way around. Eric?
Yeah. So
One person said that no is okay as long as somebody is delivering elsewhere, because leaders will sometimes respond by forcing a yes because they don't believe the individual is delivering enough. So leadership is about dealing with the core of the issue, not confusing the individual by making them think that they're being used. It's not that they're underperforming.
Yeah.
So that's what you were saying just now, Taryn.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So we do need to make the distinction between leading people through a pandemic or through the changes we've got going on and performance managing. And I do really, and this is a very big thing, and if it's something you would like to participate in some conversations around, is I think performance management as a process is one of the biggest things that is needing to alter through, you know, the work from home strategies and the things that we're doing there. So because of time, I am going to move on to the next one. So we've got transaction over connection. Now, if we have a look at this picture, you'll see the typical yin yang. Yin yang is about things being in harmony. In the before times, when we looked at the world of work, what people got from the world of work was a balance of feeling connected to other human beings that are not just their family, because whilst your family is lovely, you know, there are other human beings that can be stimulating in your world, intellectually, emotionally, even if that's people you disagree with. And so we've got a healthy level of connection, as well as delivering work, doing the transactions of work. As we've moved into a world where we are more online, and also as a trauma response to the fact that we're feeling burnt out and chaotic in the world, and the toxic positivity and avoidance of emotions, transactions have become more experienced. So the world of doing the work is far more prevalent than the connection part of things. If we look at online meetings, people sit with their cameras off. We don't have a chance to get to know each other. We just get straight into the agenda and do the work, as we did today in this presentation. So the thing that people are missing is connection. Connection is about a feeling of belonging. And so when we have a look at this debate of the role of the office to working from home, undeniably, people feel like they can work better at home. I get more done, I'm more focused, you know, I have flexibility, I can do what I need to do. There's this aspect of being able to work from home to do what I need to do. What people are missing from the office is a sense of community, a sense of being able to go and collaborate and create together. People are missing the water cooler chats, the coffee, the having a meal together, the opportunity to share what's going on, to vent. People are truly missing seeing the fact that others are experiencing the same thing they are. Now, when we're telling people we want to go back to the office, often what we do is we're instructing people to come back to the office, and they're saying, no, as I said to you in the research, I don't want to go back to the office. The question is, making me pack up everything I do at home to come to the office to do a Teams call at the office is just irritating. So the question is, how do we make offices compelling that I can do what I can do at the office that I can't do at home? And so the role of the office is changing. The role of the office, if you look at the world of what the office is about, is it's becoming more of the collaboration, creative places. People's sense of joy is directly connected to the level of color and what the environment looks like. So I must leave my warm, nice, comfy home and go to an office that's got, you know, hard desks and clinical environments. People don't want to, but they do want to connect. Connection is becoming a leadership responsibility. Whether you're working online or coming back to the office, you need to start noticing, what is the skill of connecting look like? How do we build rapport and trust? Now, I just used some words that are complete and utter misnomer. We are not going back to the office. You can't go back to the office. We need to go to the office and recreate a new kind of environment for people to be there. People don't want to go back. They don't want what was before. They want something new. And so reinventing your office and reinventing what it is about because people are going to come back to the office and feel more disconnected because they've lost the connection with people. And so whilst it's comforting, many people say it's comforting, I get to see people again, it's quite nice, they don't feel connected again to it. And so it leaves people with even a bigger hole of grief and loss in their life. One of my favorite findings from the research is people are craving conversation, not communication. People are communicated out. They're tired of being spoken at, but conversations. So this is what we're talking about in terms of, you know, moving through the emotion, chatting. And we underestimate how much inspiration, creativity, synergy, and harmony is created through daily conversations. So the leadership opportunity in this, I'm going to go through this slide and come back to it later, if we have time, is to embrace new ways to connect with your team. I've worked with so many leaders that say, well, they must come back to the office so we can connect. Please know that that is not going to happen. Connection is a skill, and it's something that requires intention and action. And it requires us to learn how to do it. There are teams and organizations that have run their businesses online for years, never having an office, and they're highly connected. So we can connect online and we can connect face to face, but that has to be a priority that's balanced with the delivery. If the only time I ever see my boss is when they're talking to me about what the presentation I must do, then that's all you care about. So having humane connections and conversations is a very big thing. So no space for time. Yes, people are busy. Busy, 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 busy. Everybody's busy. Diaries are full. And we've got this idea that, you know, the busier we are, the more important we are, or the, you know, the more valuable we are, or the more needed we are. We can see, and this is for me an amazing cartoon, that's, you know, what brain fog looks like. Is before, when I was rested and feeling healthy and well, I could do this. Now I'm sitting and going like, how do I even solve this problem? And when we don't create space, we lose the ability to grow and to be free. So I love this quote by Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The truth is, we're not choosing our response, we are reacting. We're in a high state of adrenaline addiction. We're in a high state of being pulled in multiple directions. There are many, many, many problems grabbing your attention, many, many things asking for you to pay attention to it. And we're in high reactivity mode. When we react, we are no better than an animal trying to survive and compete in a world of other people trying to survive and compete. It's very, very real in the world at the moment. And to be a leader that can interrupt the reacting, we can start to then move into creating. Being able to shift your team from a reactive space to a creative space requires breathing time. It requires time to process. And so that means, when last did you have time to play, to discover, to laugh, to reflect, to heal? If you look at your diary as an individual leader, when last did you prioritize this? Not because you were on holiday, because it's good for you. And so non-productive time is really, really important. The ability to stop producing, only having a meeting when there's producing, just to have a time to connect. I have been working with many organizations now where they do sessions with me every 2 to 3 weeks, and we spend 1 to 2 hours with no productivity agenda, just going through various exercises of self-awareness, mindfulness, and undeniably, the leaders that have been brave enough to put that sort of time and space in place for people have all been blown away by how their productivity has increased, because there's space for true thinking, and creativity starts to happen then. Problem solving starts to happen. People start feeling connected and engaged again. So let's do it, as Eric says, let's do a poll. Let's see what our working hours are like on this call. So hopefully we'll be able to see these results here. I'm just getting the poll here. So let's see, there's a poll, see what your hours are like. Okay, I think there's still a few people filling it in. All right. Let's end the poll there. 91. Let's share the results. I hope that everybody can see the results this time. So for those that you can't see, 9% of you work 6 to 8 hours. 58% of you work 8 to 10 hours. And a staggering 33% are working on average more than 10 hours a day. Yeah, that gives us a lot of powerful information around this and how, this burnout, the martyrdom, the office, how this is all contributed through this expectation of ourselves often and of the maybe sometimes unrealistic expectation of what we can deliver. So let's stop sharing. You can see that, eh?
And yeah, and I've captured it as well.
Okay. All right, let's see if I can get back to the presentation here. Oh, it's done the same thing. Sorry, just give me a second to get back to this presentation. And the challenge for us is we kind of believe that's normal, that that's the acceptable thing to do, that that's the way that things are. And breaking up with the habits of toxicity is really a difficult thing in the corporate space. So let's have a look at the last one, the empathy gap. One of the things I think we really forget is just how big a deal what we've been living through is. The fact that we entered into a pandemic where many of us were carrying a lot of trauma. When I talk about trauma, it is the best way to describe trauma is that there's a before and after experience. There's my life before this happened and my life after this happened. And we all have moments of time in our lives where we can go and say, there is a before and after experience. There can be trauma that is positive that we chose, for example, getting married or having children. We have a before and after experience there where it's something that we value. It's something we want. But when something happens to us and we have that before and after experience, we have a traumatic response to it. It is something we have to come to terms with, and it's something that impacts us very deeply. We are changed through that experience. And so, as we continue to carry all these things, I love this little comic that says, something small happens now and we beat ourselves up. But the truth of it is we're all carrying a lot. Every single person I meet, when they talk to me about what they're dealing with, is an excessive amount of difficulty. That doesn't mean we're not resilient. The truth is, as human beings, we are amazingly resilient, but resilience has become a part of toxic positivity too. There's resilience fatigue that we're seeing in the world, the expectation of being strong and bouncing back rather than processing through what is going on for you. I'm going to quickly go through this. It is something that I've spent a lot of time working with teams through, is what is the impact of the trauma on people. And we call this the corona coaster. That when trauma hits, we go into high reactive mode, we go numb, and we just want to fix something. And then we enter into coping mechanisms. This includes our addictions, our things of, trying to deal with life. We put on our big girl panties and get on with it. Coping leads to sort of a real sense of filling our time with things that we feel like we can be in control of, because it's too difficult to deal with the emotions that are coming up. And, the natural course of it is that we'd react and cope, and then we'd start to deal with it. The truth of it, we just have the next thing happen, and the next thing happen, and the next person. I had one person tell me that when you need to put to mourn on your to-do list, there's something wrong. The dealing phase is where many of us are stuck going round and round about. And this is the phase of grieving. So feeling the loss that we've experienced. And when we look at COVID, there's loss on multiple levels. Clearly, many of us are facing the loss of life, people that we've loved. There's real grief of going through the experience of trying to figure out how to live without them in our worlds. And then there's loss of all the safety and loss of the structure, loss of what we thought was, always going to be there. Our children have lost different things to us. But the loss, when we deal with it, we come to terms that it's never going to come back, and that we need to figure out a way to move forward. We don't keep trying to go back to the way it was before. We deal with the loss as it is. One person said to me, "I just miss cake." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she says, "Well, when I went to the office before, we would have cake. We could share cake. Now we can't even do that." So what have people lost? What is it that they're missing? And they can never be recreated by going backwards, that we have to put something new in place. And that leads to the creative phase. And as we move through that, we can step into integration. Now, I put this up like it's a simple, straightforward process. It's not. It's a ride. And it's a ride that's chaotic, and you can move through it in multiple ways. If you're wanting to experience this, this can be something that working through a leadership team through these stages has been very, very powerful for people to understand what does it look like and what do we do with it. But the truth of it is that we're all grieving. There is every single person we meet is grieving something. Before, grief could be something we hide away from. We could put grief in its own little box and say, okay, that person's going through something, let's get on with it. But every single person in your team and every single person you meet is carrying loss on multiple levels. And the age-old story of grief being private, that's something you do in your personal time, is no longer cutting it, because it's impacting people's ability to be real in the workplace. I've had organizations where people have lost leaders and executives, and then we kind of think we just bring in a new leader and that team must just keep performing, where their whole sense of stability, their whole sense of orientation around the way they do things has changed. And there isn't the process of care of leading them through healthy steps that help them move. Grief can be private, but it must not be secret. And being able to move people out of a secretive space to say, it's okay for you to be grieving. It's okay for me to be grieving. It's okay for us to talk about that. One of the teams that I'm working with this week that lost one of their executives, one of the hardest things that they've been battling with is to give people permission to talk about the person. So everybody just pretends like we just go on. But she was there for 30 years. How do you just go on? And so the process of helping people move through that is creating space, whether it's something leaders do or you have people that are skilled to move people through it, is really, really important. Grief cannot be project managed. It's not a straight line process. It's a humane experience. I think one of the gifts of COVID is we have to be more humane, because every single person we meet is going through the same emotional experience. And one of the things that's very, very needed, and this is important for coming back to the office and also for dealing with grief, is that we need new rituals. Rituals help people move through grief. All the rituals in our world have also changed. Things like the way we have funerals. Yeah. So I mean, my brother-in-law passed away from COVID, and we still haven't even had a funeral for him because my sister hasn't wanted to. And that leaves a big sort of, how do you move? So time becomes sort of a time warp, as opposed to there's a way to move through things. People are craving daily rituals. They're craving the rituals of the Friday afternoon drinks. They're craving ways of getting at it. They're not craving to come back to work to work. They want to come back to work to have new rituals. And if you've had people in your team that have died, giving people rituals around that is really important. For those of you that are grieving loss of loved ones, creating rituals for yourself so that you can feel like you are moving through space and time is really important. The leadership opportunity here is to learn to be comfortable with the emotions that come up with grief. To understand what grief is for yourself and for other people, and to have the resilience and the skills and the resources to deal with the emotions that grief is about. Grief skills and empathy skills for leaders is no longer something that you can outsource to, you know, can you go and phone somebody to deal with it, please, and then give me your report. We have to integrate this when we talk about that work-life integration and being okay coming back to the office. So that brings us to the point of reflection of all of these. And so I'm going to do a poll to see which one of these has stood out for you. And after that poll, we'll go to a Q&A section for those of you that would like to ask some questions or share some reflections. So let's do this poll here. Which finding stands out for you? And again, you are welcome to pick more than one. So you can pick all 5 if you really want to, but I encourage you to focus on 1 or 2 that have really stood out for you. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple more of you still filling it in, so I'll give you another couple of seconds to do that. All right, last chance if anybody wants. There you go. All right, let's see. 29 of you have filled that in. Let's end the poll and share the results. The fall of the martyr. So undeniably for this group is seeing the martyrdom and the toxic positivity that we spoke about. My fatigue is not your fatigue is next on 34%. And then we've got a tie between no space for time and transaction over connection. All right, let's stop there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen as a whole and come back to the room. If you'd like to put on your camera, that would be awesome for those of you that feel willing to do that. And let's see some thoughts and views. Eric, is there anything in the chat box that's a place to us to start?
So, music?
Yeah.
Twice this year, says Paige, I've received news of the death of someone while on a Teams call.
Oh.
And I've just not been able to keep my brief private. And Paige says she found it very helpful to have the support of a team and not to have to grieve in private. You can grieve in private, but it doesn't have to be secret.
Sorry, Paige, for that. No. I had an experience the other day where somebody received news of their brother dying as they were about to present. And so they came online and they said, no, they just received this news that their brother had just died. And their boss said, well, can you just finish the presentation and then you can go? I was like, seriously? Seriously? That's your response? Surely we are more evolved as human beings than that. Right, let's see if anybody has any questions or reflections or comments that you would like to ask. You're welcome to do that now. We've got 10 minutes for some chat and conversations. You can just put up your hand or put yourself off mute. Alida, I'm not sure if there's something specific you'd like to start off with and say. in terms of what you heard this time. You've heard it before, but every time you hear it, I'm sure you hear something else.
Taryn, I was just thinking that I checked in with Paige as well, and I know that you are, coming through to our fan court session that we'll have in March next year. That's, I think, what I connected with so deeply now is I've listened to this for the second time, but it is interesting that, depending on where you find yourself, different pieces of this, resonate differently with you. So for me, the first time it was definitely, if I can't hear no, I can't say no. If I can't say no, I can't hear no was my big one the last time, because I'm definitely a positive person by nature, you know me well. And so I do think I suffer of this toxic positivity, as well as I can't say no, so I can't hear no. And so I know those are my challenges. But I think today, where my mind is today, is that, on the other side of vaccines, I think there is a lot of conversation around how do we return to the office. And I think your, points around, if we're trying to say, well, let's go back to the office because we're going back to the past, that's just not how, we're going to attract people. So I quite like the point where you said, what do I need to go and do at the office that I can't do at home? And almost think about what experience are we creating for people when they go to the office, rather than to try and say, let's, go to the office to work. Because I just think it is not landing well with most people that I'm chatting to. But I think employers aren't really connecting with this. It's almost like they want to just force people to, say, well, now we're going to start going back to the office and this is the rules. So I think that piece for me, to unpack that a bit, to try and understand how do we create this environment that people are excited to go back to, what does it look like, would be very valuable. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else have any observations or questions or thoughts? Paige, did you want to say something?
No, I think from the office point of view, in terms of coming back, sorry, can you hear me with this thing?
It's a little,
yeah, it's a little bit blurry, sorry. Is this idea of, we used to come to the office to be productive. This is where we came to complete our work, whereas I think people, as you said, now are being more productive at home because they're working in an environment that is suitable for them. So reimagining what the office is how do we create this space to be where we come to connect, and then if you would like to stay here and do your work, or go home and do your work where you feel most productive. So does that mean 5 days of the week? Does it mean certain times of the week where people come just to connect, and what do those activities look like? So I suppose it depends what team you're in. An investment team might operate very differently to a business development team, to an operational team. So I suppose it will be up to each division to kind of see what works well for them.
exactly. And it is bespoke, and it can change for different teams. It doesn't have to be organizational. It can be team-based. And I really encourage, those of you that are trying to find how do we do this, is to spend some time looking at more, what are the principles that can govern the way people can make their own choices around this? And instead of trying to manage, again, those outliers, what's our culture asking us to create? Because this can be a great story. Culture is the outcome of the stories people say about their office, what they talk about. And so how do we create this to be a story of something that is, marks a great place in the organization's legacy, as opposed to something that everybody's resisting.
So there is a company here who has gone back to the
Taryn, can I also say something just on that? I'll show you my video, and you can see how casual I am.
Hello, Craig. Nice to see your casual face.
Yeah, I went for a walk, and I'm because I think this is what we're seeing at Truffle, is people like coming in to connect, and I took a lot from what you said. The connection isn't the work connection. Like do this, pick this up, move that there. They want to come in and have coffee and talk shit, to be perfect.
Exactly right.
They like that. People, they come back from leave. They want to come into the office to
show their photos.
And that's what resonated. One of the things that you said, because we've just had that with someone coming back from leave. And I use myself as a bit of an example. So I put the video on. I actually went for a walk this morning, about 7:30 for an hour in the suburb. Then went for a cup of coffee. Came back at about 20 to 9, okay, which is quite late in the old traditional sense. Didn't have time for a shower. logged on,
Yeah.
listening to you and everybody for an hour, and it's been very rewarding. And I think, and I'll go in now in the next hour or so. And that's what we're finding that people like is I suppose what I've done today is an illustration, and it felt natural.
No.
It feels natural. People want, you're still productive. That's the thing. Your productivity is there, but you get that little bit of space.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we're finding with all the new recruits we're hiring, because we've been hiring quite a few people, is that they want that. They want that, the flexibility. They like the fact that there is an office, because we're social animals, and you can combine the benefits of that with the productivity gains of working from home.
Yeah.
And the flexibility to choose.
Yeah, it requires courageous leadership again, because then we need to manage outliers. And if people don't fit into that kind of very mature adult environment, then we need to help them find new ways of making decisions and so on and so forth. But what you're describing is really a perfect example of this work-life integration. And, next Thursday won't be the same, hey, Craig? So it's not like on Thursdays I do this and on Wednesdays I do this. It's that, and so even flexibility doesn't seem to be the word that captures it for people, but just the opportunity to make it work for myself, to figure out how to make it work. And amazingly, when we start giving people that level of choice, they need to choose the things that work for them. And so they've got no one to blame if it's not working. So accountability starts to become something we can see in the environment.
Yeah, Taryn, just from my personal experience, because, and I've started to do this more and more in the last little while, is what I did today as an example. That space that you need to create.
Exactly.
What did you say? It's productive space. I can't remember what you used the term, but it's a gap.
Yeah. So no productivity agenda. So
it's a no productivity gap.
Yeah.
That hour, if you go for a walk or whatever it is you do, don't go there and start thinking through your meeting in an hour's time, because that's not going to help. Actually, just go and walk and look and breathe and smell and see. That's the piece that gives you the sanity.
Yes. Exactly.
For the rest of the insanity, if you know what I mean, which is the human insanity that we've created for ourselves. That's just my observation.
Beautiful. So we are on 10:30. So for those of you that feel that this is where the place you want to end, I'm happy to stay online for a few minutes longer for anybody who has any questions or wants to have a conversation. Otherwise, really, Alida, I don't know if you want to say anything to close it off. It's been a real joy and a privilege to share this information, and I hope something has landed for each of you in a different way. So whatever your story is, whatever your experience is, that you take that as a meaningful moment forward for you. Alida, do you want to say something to close it off?
Firstly, Taryn, thank you for your time. The work that you've presented and the advice that you've provided in terms of the leadership opportunities are firstly, just so valuable, I think, to me, and I'm hoping to everyone on the call as well. And you've got this amazing ability just to make it very practical and something to connect with and understand and something to action. I like action. But at the same time, you've just got a skill and an amazing ability to hear people. And thank you for sharing what you heard and how you could translate that so beautifully to us today. And I want to just encourage everyone to say that I know these sessions, you need to take it in and you need to sit a bit with it. So we are going to see Taryn for the sequel of this conversation at FanCourt in March. So if you want to use the time between now and then to deeply reflect on some of these issues, because then you'll also be able to pick them up with Taryn in person, at FanCourt. But in the meantime, of course, we're going to share the recording with everyone so that you can also listen to it again. And we will also share Taryn's details with you, in case you want to if you want to pick up a direct conversation with her on any of the particular pieces that resonated with you, or maybe your team as a whole. Then you'll be more than welcome to also reach out to her. So Taryn, thank you for your time. It's we always think an hour and a half is a lot, but it's never a lot when we go through these conversations. So I feel a bit sad to end it so abruptly, but I know we need to honor people's diaries and their boundaries and saying it's enough. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for making the time.
Thanks, Alida. Thank you, everybody, and sending
Thanks,
love.
Taryn.
to people. And like I said, I'm happy for a few more minutes if anybody wants to connect. Otherwise, I look forward to connecting with you going forward. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Taryn. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording.